Little MAGA girl was kicked out of Walmart by a leftist, but a veteran rushed in and shouted. It was a Thursday afternoon that promised to be nothing more than another peaceful chapter in the heart of suburban America, beneath the constant hypnotic hum of the fluorescent lights of a sprawling local Walmart. The air smelled of a familiar mix of cheap popcorn, industrial cleaning products, and chilled air conditioning, a scent that, for millions of Americans, signified comfort, routine, and the abundance of the free market. Walking through the wide aisles stacked high with merchandise was Sarah, a young girl of just 14 years, whose very presence seemed to brighten the sterile environment of the superstore. She wasn't just an ordinary teenager. She was the embodiment of an innocence that seemed to be rapidly disappearing from the modern world. Dressed in a shimmering pink sequined dress that reflected the overhead lights like tiny stars of hope, Sarah carried a pastel-colored school backpack on her shoulders, suggesting she had just come from school, or perhaps a dance recital. However, the most striking detail of her outfit was not the festive dress, but the bright red cap resting atop her golden curls, emblazoned with 4 bold white letters, MAGA. For the little MAGA girl, that hat was not a calculated political provocation. It was a talisman of love, an emotional heirloom. It had been a gift from her grandfather, a man who had taught her from the cradle to love the flag, respect the Constitution, and take pride in the deep roots that sustained their nation. Wearing that hat was Sarah's silent, sweet way of telling the world she loved her country and her family, unaware that in the current atmosphere charged with division, that simple piece of red fabric had become a target for the predatory eyes of intolerance. Sarah pushed the metal cart with a carefree lightness, humming a patriotic melody she had learned in church choir under her breath. Her eyes scanning the shelves for snacks for a family movie night. She was momentarily alone, her parents having split up to grab items in the hardware and garden sections, leaving her with the very important responsibility of choosing the candy and cereal. This small independence made her feel grown up, confident. She paused in front of the colorful cereal section, smiling at the cartoon mascots on the boxes, completely oblivious to the ideological storm quietly gathering at her rear flank. The world around her seemed normal. Mothers checking shopping lists, employees restocking shelves, the distant beep of cash registers. But normality is often a fragile illusion, ready to be shattered by those who carry chaos within them. Sarah didn't notice when the atmosphere in the aisle shifted subtly. There was no thunderclap or siren, just a change in the air pressure, a sensation that the temperature had dropped a few degrees, bringing a chill that didn't come from the freezers, but from human malevolence. A few yards away, standing at the entrance of the aisle, stood the antithesis of everything Sarah represented. A woman in her early 30s with a rigid, aggressive posture watched the girl like a hawk watching a distracted songbird. Her hair was dyed in screaming artificial shades of neon blue and purple, a visual beacon of her affiliation with the radical left. She wore a distressed denim vest that served as the armor of her ideology, covered from top to bottom with buttons, patches, and slogans screaming messages of revolt, socialism, and the deconstruction of traditional values. The woman wasn't there to buy milk or bread. Her body language exuded a contained fury, a desperate need to find an enemy where none existed. Her eyes, narrowed and loaded with visceral contempt, fixed immediately on Sarah's red hat. To the activist, that wasn't a child's accessory. It was a personal insult, an affront to her woke worldview. The sight of the letters MAGA acted as a trigger, igniting a flame of twisted moral indignation that quickly consumed any sense of decency or proportion. The leftist began to breathe heavier, her hands balling into fists at her sides, and she started to march down the aisle, not as a customer, but as an inquisitor hunting for heretics. Sarah, still immersed in her bubble of innocence, picked up a box of cereal and turned it over to read the ingredients, feeling happy. It was then that she felt it, the primal sensation of being watched. The fine hairs on her arms stood up beneath the sleeves of her pink dress. The humming died on her lips. She turned her head slowly, expecting to see her mother or father, but what she found made her stomach turn into a knot of anxiety. The woman with the purple hair was standing just a few steps away, blocking the escape route from the aisle. The silence between the two was heavy, charged with bad static electricity. Sarah tried to offer a shy smile, a reflex of her polite upbringing, attempting to dissipate the tension she didn't fully understand. "Excuse me?" the girl murmured, her voice coming out small and trembling, trying to maneuver the cart to pass. But the woman didn't move. On the contrary, she took a step forward, aggressively invading the teenager's personal space. Sarah's smile faltered and vanished, replaced by an expression of confusion and rising fear. She looked side to side, seeking help, but the aisle was momentarily empty of other shoppers, creating a terrifying isolation. She was alone with the hate. The activist let out a sound of scorn, a dry, humorless laugh that echoed coldly among the metal shelves. "Excuse me?" the woman repeated, her voice dripping with poisonous sarcasm. "You think you have the right to ask for an excuse while parading around with that on your head inside my community?" The woman's index finger, tipped with black-painted nails, rose accusingly, pointing directly at Sarah's face, or more specifically, at her forehead where the cap rested. Sarah instinctively recoiled, her back hitting the cereal shelf, the noise of boxes falling to the floor, amplifying her fright. The little MAGA girl's heart began to beat erratically against her ribs. She had never been confronted by an adult in this manner. At her school, there were arguments, sure, but nothing that compared to the intensity of the loathing emanating from this stranger. I'm just shopping, Mom," Sarah stammered, her eyes beginning to water with the sudden injustice of the situation. She felt small, vulnerable, a child in pink facing an ideological monster that seemed to grow in size by the second. "Don't call me Mom," the activist shouted, making Sarah visibly flinch. "I am not your ma'am. I am someone who will not tolerate the propagation of fascism in the dairy aisle. You think it's cute? You think it's a game to wear the symbols of an oppressor?" The activist began to pace back and forth, gesturing frantically, as if performing for an invisible audience, reciting a script of buzzwords that Sarah could barely process. Patriarchy, systemic oppression, supremacy. To the girl, they were just furious words thrown like stones. She didn't see politics, she saw cruelty. The joy of the afternoon had evaporated, replaced by an icy terror. Sarah brought her hands to the cap, a gesture of protection, as if trying to hold on to the only thing connecting her to her grandfather's safety in that moment of danger. This gesture, however, only infuriated the antagonist more. The leftist saw in the girl's defense a stubbornness, a refusal to accept the forced re-education she was ready to administer right there, in the middle of Walmart. Sarah's isolation seemed to deepen. Where were the employees? Where were her parents? The outside world seemed to have vanished, leaving her trapped in a time bubble where only the woman's shrill voice existed. Sarah's vulnerability was palpable. She was just a 14-year-old girl who liked sparkles, and her country, now cornered by an adult who had lost the ability to see humanity in the other. The activist stopped pacing and leaned forward, bringing her face uncomfortably close to the girl's, her eyes flashing with a fanatical moral certainty. "You are going to take that off," the woman hissed, her voice dropping to a menacing tone. "You are going to take that trash off your head right now, or I will make sure everyone in this store and everyone on the internet knows exactly what kind of horrible person you are." The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah felt the hot tears finally spill over, running down her rosy cheeks. She was paralyzed, unable to flee, unable to fight, a perfect victim for the fury of the radical left that knew no mercy, not even for a child. The stage was set for disaster, and the little MAGA girl, trembling in her sequined dress, had never felt so alone and helpless in her entire life. The air in the cereal aisle, once still, now felt sucked dry of oxygen, replaced by the suffocating weight of an interrogation. The threat issued by the woman with the purple hair hung heavy and toxic between them. "Take that trash off your head." It was a command, not a request, and it was backed by the full force of a distorted worldview that saw a 14-year-old girl not as a human being, but as a political symbol to be crushed. Sarah, trembling in her sequined pink dress, felt her hands grip the handle of her shopping cart so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to run, to push past the woman and find the safety of her father's arms in the hardware section, but her legs felt like lead. The fear was paralyzing, a deep, primal instinct that told her any sudden movement might trigger an attack. The activist, seeing the girl's hesitation, did not soften. Instead, she seemed to feed on the fear, interpreting the child's silence as defiance. The leftist reached into the pocket of her frayed denim vest and pulled out a smartphone. With a practiced flick of her wrist, she opened the camera app, hit record, and thrust the lens into Sarah's face, weaponizing the digital age against a frightened teenager. "Say hello to the world, bigot!" the woman sneered, the red recording light blinking like a robotic eye of judgment. "I'm going live right now. Everyone is going to see this. They're going to see the face of the next generation of hate." Sarah instinctively raised her hands to cover her face, trying to hide behind her small fingers, sobbing quietly. "Please, stop." "I didn't do anything," she cried, her voice muffled and broken. But the camera didn't waver. The activist began narrating to her invisible online audience, her voice pitching up into a performative outrage. "Look at this, guys. This is what we are fighting against. Right here in our local Walmart, they are breeding them young. She's wearing the symbol of the oppressor, the symbol of the patriarchy, right in front of my face. She feels safe spewing her hate here. Well, not on my watch." The twisted logic was dizzying. Sarah listened in horror as her innocent shopping trip was spun into a narrative of oppression. The woman used words like systemic violence and white privilege as clubs to beat down a girl whose only crime was buying snacks while loving her country. To the activist, Sarah was a monster. To Sarah, the world had gone mad. The harassment escalated from digital intimidation to physical aggression. The woman, emboldened by her own rhetoric, took a step closer, kicking the front wheel of Sarah's cart with a heavy combat boot. The cart jolted back, slamming into Sarah's hip. The pain was sharp, but the shock was worse. "You think you can hide behind that phone?" the woman shouted, lowering the device slightly to glare directly into Sarah's tear-filled eyes. "You and your family. You are the reason this country is broken. You vote for tyrants. You support racists. You want to take away my rights." The accusations flew like shrapnel. Sarah, confused and terrified, tried to speak, tried to explain that she just loved the flag because her grandpa fought for it, but the words stuck in her throat. How do you debate with fury? How does a child reason with an adult who has abandoned reason for ideology? I love America," Sarah finally managed to whisper, a tiny spark of truth amidst the dark storm. That was the wrong thing to say. The declaration of patriotism acted like gasoline on the activist's fire. "You love America?" the woman mocked, her face contorting with disgust. "You love a lie. You love a stolen land. You love a history of blood." The activist's eyes darted to the contents of Sarah's cart. Nestled among the bags of chips and cookies were a few small handheld American flags that Sarah had picked up for the 4th of July decorations. The sight of the stars and stripes seemed to snap the last tether of the woman's self-control. With a sudden, violent motion, she reached into the cart and snatched the small bundle of flags. "This," she screamed, shaking the flags in Sarah's face like a weapon, "this is a rag of oppression, and you treat it like it's holy. It's garbage." The woman didn't just hold them. She brandished them aggressively, stepping forward and using the plastic sticks to poke at the MAGA hat on Sarah's head, trying to knock it off. "Stop it! That's mine!" Sarah shrieked, the violation of her personal space finally breaking her paralysis. She reached out to grab the flags back, but the woman swatted her hand away with surprising force. The physical contact sent a jolt of panic through the aisle. A few other shoppers had gathered by now, drawn by the shouting. They stood at the ends of the aisle, clutching their own carts, their faces masks of uncomfortable indecision. The bystander effect was in full force. People saw a grown woman berating a child, but the political nature of the conflict, the camera recording, and the sheer ferocity of the attacker kept them at bay. They were afraid of becoming the next target, afraid of being cancelled, afraid of the confrontation. Sarah looked at them, a man in a suit, a woman with a toddler, pleading with her eyes for help, but they looked away, pretending to check their phones or whispering to each other. The isolation was complete. The message was clear. In this new world, if you hold the wrong views, you are on your own. The activist, seeing the crowd but no intervention, felt validated. She felt powerful. She threw the small flags onto the dirty linoleum floor and stomped on them, grinding the fabric under her boot heel. "This is what I think of your patriotism," she spat. Sarah gasped, a sound of pure heartbreak. To her, seeing the flag on the floor was like seeing a family member hurt. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah wailed, her body shaking uncontrollably. The tears were now a torrent, ruining her makeup, dripping onto her shiny dress. She felt stripped of her dignity, stripped of her safety. The safe suburban world she knew had dissolved, revealing a harsh reality where adults could be cruel bullies simply because of a hat. The leftist loomed over her, a giant of intolerance. "I'm doing this to teach you a lesson, little girl," the woman hissed, leaning in so close that Sarah could smell the stale coffee on her breath. "Socialism is the future. Your traditional values are dead. You are obsolete. Now, take off that hat, drop it on the floor with these flags, and maybe I'll let you leave without posting this video to my 50,000 followers." It was the ultimate ultimatum, submission or destruction. Sarah felt a crushing weight on her chest. She looked at the crushed flags on the floor, then at the hateful lens of the camera, and finally at the exit, which seemed miles away. She raised her trembling hands slowly towards the brim of her red cap. Her spirit was breaking, the relentless assault, the twisting of her love for her country into something evil, and the total abandonment by the bystanders had drained her resolve. She was just a little girl, and the monster was winning. The activist smirked, a cruel smile of triumph spreading across her face as she watched the child's hand touch the cap. "That's it," the woman goaded. "Do it, renounce it, admit you're wrong." The tension in the aisle was at its absolute peak. The air hummed with the impending victory of bullying over freedom. Sarah closed her eyes, preparing to surrender, preparing to give up the symbol of her grandfather's pride just to make the hurting stop. But just as her fingers gripped the fabric of the hat to pull it off, a vibration seemed to travel through the floor, a heavy, rhythmic thud that had nothing to do with the supermarket music. It was the sound of authority approaching. The universe of the Walmart cereal aisle had shrunk down to a single, agonizing point of focus. The brim of a red baseball cap and the trembling fingers of a 14-year-old girl. Sarah's spirit was effectively crushed. The psychological weight of the assault, the public shaming, and the sheer, unadulterated hatred pouring from the woman with the purple hair had done its work. The leftist stood over her victim, smartphone held high like a trophy, recording the exact moment the little MAGA girl would surrender her identity to the mob. That's right, the activist goaded, zooming in on Sarah's tear-streaked face. Take it off. Throw it in the trash where it belongs. Apologize for your privilege. The silence from the bystanders was a deafening accomplice. Sarah, sobbing softly, began to lift the hat, her heart breaking with every millimeter the fabric moved. She felt she was betraying her grandfather, betraying herself. But the fear was a physical pain she couldn't endure any longer. The activist's lips curled into a sneer of absolute victory. She had won. The ideology of force had triumphed over the innocence of youth. But the victory was premature. Just as Sarah's grip tightened to pull the cap free, a sound tore through the oppressive atmosphere of the aisle. A sound so sharp, so authoritative, and so utterly out of place in a modern supermarket that it caused the very air to vibrate. Crack. It was the sound of a heavy wooden cane striking the linoleum floor with the force of a gavel, delivering a final verdict. It was followed immediately by a voice that didn't just speak. It thundered. A baritone roar, gravelly with age but tempered by decades of command, cut through the activist's shrill narration like a broadsword. "Stand down!" The command was so powerful that Sarah froze instantly, her hands dropping from her head. The activist, startled, spun around, the camera in her hand shaking wildly. The bystanders, who had been cowed into silence, gasped and parted like the Red Sea, making way for the figure emerging from the shadows of the main concourse. He walked slowly, but with a rhythmic, unstoppable cadence. Thud, step. Thud, step. He was an elderly man, likely in his late 90s, but the years had not bowed his spine. They had only hardened it into steel. He was not wearing the casual attire of a shopper. He was dressed in his full military dress uniform, an immaculate deep blue jacket with gold buttons that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. On his shoulders sat the rank insignia of a chaotic past. On his chest, a dazzling rack of ribbons and medals told a story of hell on earth survived with honor. The Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, the World War II Victory Medal. A combat infantryman badge sat high and proud. He was a wee veteran, a living relic of the greatest generation, walking into a petty cultural skirmish armed with the moral weight of history. The veteran didn't look at the crowd. His steel-grey eyes were locked onto the woman with the neon hair like the sights of a Garand rifle. He moved past the frozen shoppers, his cane hitting the ground with a rhythmic precision that sounded like a drumbeat of war. He didn't stop until he had placed himself physically between the activist and the trembling teenager, creating an impenetrable human shield of honor and duty. The contrast was jarring. On one side, the chaotic, disheveled aesthetic of modern radicalism. On the other, the crisp, disciplined elegance of traditional service. The activist, recovering from her initial shock, tried to regain the offensive. She pointed her phone at the old man, her instincts to document and destroy kicking in. "Who do you think you are?" she snapped, though her voice lacked its previous venom, shaken by the man's imposing presence. "You're interrupting a protest. Step aside, old man. This doesn't concern you." The veteran ignored the phone completely. He looked down at the activist, his expression one of profound, disappointed judgment. "Doesn't concern me," he repeated, his voice low and dangerous, rumbling deep in his chest. "I spent 3 years in the mud of Europe fighting to stop fanatics from terrorizing the innocent. I took shrapnel in my leg at the bulge so that children in this country could walk the streets without fear of persecution. And now I walk into a grocery store in the country I bled for, and I see you." He spat the word as if it were a curse. "I see you tormenting a child, bullying a little girl. You call that a protest? In my day, we called that tyranny." The word tyranny hung in the air. The activist bristled, her ideological programming firing back. "You don't know what you're talking about, boomer." she shouted, trying to drown him out with volume. She is wearing a hate symbol. She is supporting fascism. I'm fighting for tolerance. I'm on the right side of history. The veteran slammed his cane down again, the noise silencing her instantly. Tolerance! He roared, his face flushing with righteous anger. You speak of tolerance while you scream at a 14-year-old girl until she cries? You speak of history while you stomp on the flag that covers the coffins of my friends. He pointed a gnarled, shaking finger at the small American flags the woman had crushed on the floor. You have no idea what fascism is, young lady. I looked it in the eye. Fascism is silencing opposition through fear. Fascism is demanding submission or destruction. Fascism is exactly what you are doing right now. He turned slightly, ensuring Sarah was still behind him, shielded. This little girl, he continued, gesturing back to the little MAGA girl, who was now looking up at him with wide, awestruck eyes, is wearing a hat. A hat that represents her political choice, her freedom of expression, the very First Amendment that I and millions of others swore to defend with our lives. You don't have to like it, you can hate it. But the moment you use intimidation to strip her of that right, you become the very monster you claim to fight. The dynamic in the aisle had shifted tectonically. The bystanders were no longer looking at their feet. They were looking at the veteran, their postures straightening, a dormant sense of shame and pride awakening in them. Someone in the back murmured, "He's right." The activist sensed the room turning against her. Her narrative was crumbling. The oppressor she was trying to paint was a decorated war hero, and the villain was a crying child. Desperate to salvage her power trip, she doubled down on the institutional threat. You can't talk to me like that," the leftist stammered, backing away but keeping her phone raised. "I'm going to report you. I'm going to post this video. Do you know who I am? I have 50,000 followers. I'll have you cancelled. I'll contact the VA. I'll have this store boycotted if they don't throw both of you out right now. You're protecting a racist." The veteran didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He stood tall, a monument to a time when men were made of sterner stuff. "Go ahead," he challenged, his voice calm and icy. "Post your video. Show the world how you attacked a child and how an old soldier had to stop you. Let the American people decide who the villain is. As for cancelling me," he let out a short, dry chuckle. "I've survived German artillery, winter in the Ardennes, and the loss of better men than me. Do you really think I am afraid of a mean comment on the internet from a person who attacks children?" The activist's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked at the veteran, implacable and immovable, and then at Sarah, who had stopped crying and was now standing closer to the old man, clutching his jacket sleeve like a lifeline. The radical leftist realized she had lost the physical ground. She couldn't push past him, and she couldn't outshout him. Defeated by moral superiority, she resorted to a final, petty retreat. "This country is doomed because of people like you," she spat, shoving her phone back into her pocket. "You'll hear from corporate. This isn't over. I'm getting the manager to ban you both for harassment." With a final huff of indignation, the woman with the purple hair spun on her heel and stormed off towards the customer service desk, her heavy boots clomping away, leaving a wake of uneasy silence behind her. The threat of institutional retaliation hung in the air. She was going to try to use the system to punish them, but for the moment, the immediate physical danger was gone. The veteran let out a long breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly, the combat tension draining from his aged frame. He turned slowly to face Sarah. The transformation was instant. The fierce warrior dissolved into a gentle, grandfatherly figure. He leaned his cane against the shelf and reached into his uniform pocket, retrieving a pristine, folded white handkerchief. "Here now, soldier," he said softly, offering the cloth to the girl. "Dry those tears. The enemy has retreated." Sarah took the handkerchief, her hands still shaking. She looked at the old man's face, etched with wrinkles of wisdom and kindness. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. I was so scared. She wanted me to take my hat off. She stepped on the flags. The veteran's expression softened with infinite sadness and compassion. He slowly knelt down on one knee, a difficult feat for his age, causing his joints to pop, but he did it with dignity, to be at eye level with her. He reached out and gently adjusted the MAGA cap on her head, making sure it was straight. "Listen to me, young lady," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "You never take this hat off for anyone who demands it with hate. You wear it because you are free. Do you understand? I didn't cross an ocean and watch my friends die so you could be bullied in a cereal aisle." He then looked down at the trampled flags on the floor. With a grunt of effort, he reached out and picked them up, dusting them off with a reverence that was almost religious. He handed them back to Sarah. "These colors don't run, and neither do we," he said firmly. "But she is right about one thing. This isn't over. People like her. They don't give up easily. She will try to bring the store management down on us. She will try to lie." He stood up, using his cane for support, and placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "But you are not alone anymore. I've got your 6. We will stand here and wait for whatever comes next. Together." The climax had passed, the hero had arrived, and the villain had been repelled. But the shadow of the system loomed. The activist was currently at the front desk, spinning her web of lies. And the true test of whether justice would prevail in the modern world was about to begin. Sarah looked up at her savior, and for the first time since she entered the store, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a patriot, protected by the shield of history. The silence that had settled over the cereal aisle was fragile, a temporary ceasefire held together only by the imposing presence of the World War II veteran. Sarah stood close to him, the smell of old wool and starch from his uniform offering a strange sense of comfort amidst the chaos. Her heart was still fluttering like a trapped bird, but the tears had stopped. She adjusted the brim of her red MAGA hat, not with shame this time, but with a newfound sense of defiance. The veteran, whose name she still didn't know, stood like a statue of liberty itself, his hands resting on the head of his cane, his eyes fixed on the front of the aisle where the activist had disappeared. They were waiting for the system to respond. In the modern world, justice was often twisted. The loud and the aggressive frequently manipulated the rules to punish the quiet and the patriotic. The fear that the store manager would come marching down to kick them out, to expel the girl for her hat and the old man for his intervention, was real. It was the fear of a culture that seemed to have turned its back on its own heroes. Then the sound of approaching footsteps broke the stillness. It wasn't the singular rhythmic clomp of the activist's boots this time. It was a group. The Leftist returned, and she had brought reinforcements. Beside her walked the store manager, a middle-aged man in a short-sleeved dress shirt and a tie that looked too tight, holding a walkie-talkie. Flanking them were 2 uniformed security guards. The activist looked triumphant, her chest puffed out. A smirk of malicious anticipation plastered across her face. She pointed a black-painted fingernail at the veteran and Sarah as they approached. "There they are!" she screeched, her voice echoing off the linoleum. "That's the man who assaulted me, and that is the girl who is provoking customers with hate speech. I want them both arrested for harassment, and I want them banned from this property immediately." The manager stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. The security guards placed their hands on their belts, looking from the screaming woman to the frail but stoic old man in the dress uniform. The tension in the aisle spiked to its absolute zenith. Sarah instinctively stepped behind the veteran, gripping the back of his jacket. The activist continued her tirade, spinning a web of lies so thick it was suffocating. "I was just shopping peacefully," she lied, her voice pitching into a fake whine of victimhood. And this fascist in the costume attacked me with his cane. He threatened my life. And that girl, she was shouting slurs at me. I don't feel safe. This is a violation of the store's code of conduct. The veteran didn't move. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched the manager, waiting. The manager looked at the activist, then shifted his gaze to the veteran. He looked at the medals on the old man's chest, the bronze star, the purple heart, the ribbons that signified campaigns in hellish theaters of war long forgotten by the TikTok generation. Then he looked at Sarah, a 14-year-old girl in a sparkly pink dress, clutching a packet of crushed American flags, her eyes red from crying. The contrast between the activist's hysterical accusations and the reality of the scene was stark. "Sir," the manager said, addressing the veteran. His voice was calm, professional. "This customer claims you threatened her with a weapon and that you are creating a disturbance. Do you have anything to say?" The activist smirked. She thought she had won. She thought the corporate fear of a lawsuit or a social media backlash would force the manager to capitulate. The veteran straightened his spine, drawing himself up to his full height. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He spoke with the quiet, devastating clarity of a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone but God. "Son," the veteran said to the manager, "I fought the Nazis in 1944 so that Americans could live without fear of intimidation. Today I watched this woman corner a terrified child, scream at her, destroy her property," he pointed to the flags in Sarah's hand, "and demand she strip off her clothing because she didn't like the political slogan on a hat. I did not threaten her. I stopped an assault. If defending the defenseless is a disturbance in your store, then you may escort me out in handcuffs, but I will not leave this girl to be wolf bait." The aisle went silent. The truth of his words hung heavy in the air. The activist scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, save the patriotic speech, Grandpa. It's hate speech. It's quiet," the manager said. "It wasn't a request." He turned his head sharply toward the woman with the purple hair. "I said, be quiet." The activist's mouth snapped shut in shock. The manager turned back to the veteran, and for the first time, a genuine softness entered his eyes. "My father served in Korea," the manager said softly. "I know a combat infantryman badge when I see one." He then turned to the security guards. "Gentlemen, I was watching the security feed from the office before she even came to get me. I saw the whole thing." The color drained from the activist's face. The arrogance vanished, replaced by the panic of a bully who has been caught. You watched," she stammered. "I saw you follow a minor down the aisle," the manager continued, his voice rising in volume, projecting so the gathering crowd of shoppers could hear. "I saw you block her path. I saw you screaming at her while she was crying. And I saw you destroy unpaid merchandise, those flags, before this gentleman stepped in." The manager took a step toward the leftist, his authority as the guardian of his store finally asserting itself against the chaos. "In this store, we welcome everyone, Republicans, Democrats, Independents. But what we do not tolerate is harassment. We do not tolerate bullying children. And we certainly do not tolerate the desecration of the American flag on my floor." The crowd, which had been silent for so long, suddenly erupted. It started with a slow clap from a man in work boots at the end of the aisle and quickly spread. People began to cheer. "Get her out of here!" someone shouted. "God bless the veteran!" cried another. The moral tide had turned completely. The little MAGA girl wasn't the pariah, she was the protected. The manager gestured to the door. "Ma'am, you are banned from this Walmart. Security will escort you out now. If you return, you will be arrested for trespassing." The activist was sputtering, her face turning a deep shade of crimson. You're all fascists. This is discrimination. I'm going to cancel this store. I'm going to ruin you." she screamed, flailing as the security guard stepped forward, firmly taking her by the arms. She tried to resist, but the wall of public disapproval was too high. As she was dragged away, shouting slogans that no longer held any power, the toxicity left the air, replaced by a fresh breeze of justice. The leftist was gone, expelled not by violence, but by the collective realization that some values, decency, respect, and protection of the innocent, are more important than political rage. When the noise of her exit faded, the manager turned back to the veteran and Sarah. He extended his hand to the old soldier. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that, sir, and I want to thank you. You did the right thing." The veteran shook the manager's hand, a firm, strong grip. "Just doing my duty, son, just doing my duty." The manager then looked at Sarah. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a coupon for a free family dinner at the store's deli. "And for you, young lady, I apologize that you didn't feel safe here. Please, take this. And take the flags. They're on the house." Sarah took the coupon and the flags, sniffing back the last of her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. She looked up at the veteran. "Thank you for saving me." The veteran smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "You saved yourself, kid. You didn't take the hat off. You stood your ground." He placed a hand on her shoulder one last time. "Remember this day. There will always be people who try to make you feel small for loving your country. They will shout, they will lie, and they will try to shame you. But you are part of a long line of patriots. You have the blood of freedom running through your veins. Never let them take that away from you. Wear that hat, wave that flag, and never, ever apologize for being an American." Sarah nodded, a new strength settling in her soul. She wasn't just a little MAGA girl anymore. She was a survivor, a witness to true courage. The veteran tipped his cap to her. "Now, I believe you have a movie night to get to. Don't let the bad guys win by ruining your evening." As Sarah walked away toward the checkout, clutching her flags and her snacks, she turned back one last time. The veteran was walking in the opposite direction, his cane tapping rhythmically, disappearing into the vastness of the store like a guardian angel returning to the ether. The shoppers were still watching him with reverence, some reaching out to shake his hand as he passed. Sarah walked out of the automatic doors into the warm evening sun. The world looked different now. It was brighter. She placed the red MAGA hat firmly on her head, adjusting it to be perfectly centered. She took a deep breath of the free air. She knew that the fight for her values would continue, that there would be other bullies and other battles, but she also knew that she wasn't alone. The spirit of the greatest generation, the spirit of honor and sacrifice, was still alive, watching over her. And as long as that spirit existed, the America she loved would never truly be lost. She smiled, marched to her parents' car, and prepared to tell them the story of the day she met a hero.